You're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, October 23rd. The time is now 5 p.m. And with me this evening, I have Ralph Valenzizi. And today's agenda looks very interesting. We have policy 6013A, collection, development, and maintenance policy. Policy 6013B, library display and programming policy, and also the policy 6013C, library material review and reconsideration policy. Uh, I also have this evening board member Janine Randolph. Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig will be signing in momentarily. And with that, I need approval of minutes.
So moved to approve minutes.
Thank you. I know the minutes have been approved by Mary Ellen. Also, she had just called in, so that's a unanimous. And thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. I know we've all had a long day, and I appreciate everybody being here. And Ralph, this meeting's all yours now.
Oh, great. Thank you, Chairman Carpio and board members. Good evening. So I'm really glad to get together tonight, and we're going to be doing a first reading of some new policies and stuff. If you remember about a year ago, Audrey, I think it was a year. It was actually it was about a year ago this time, like back in September. We put into place some policies regarding if people were going to question any of our selections of books. Um, this was all done in conjunction with our library and media specialists, who are two of them are here on the call with us tonight that are going to present to you about some other changes. So since this has happened, I guess we realized that we were kind of in many ways only about if half the districts in Connecticut had policies similar to what we had in place. Over the summer, though, the state has actually said that we need to have policies similar to what we had, but in a little bit of a different format. So they actually got a little bit more specific. And what I know that Audra and Renee, who have been, really integral in making sure that we're getting ourselves up to date, have been working on this. I know Mary Ellen actually was at, I believe, some of the meetings with you at the State Department, learning more about this. So tonight, I'm going to ask Audra Good, our library media specialist from Brookside, and Renee Niger, our library media specialist over at Cranberry, to talk to you tonight about the three different policies that the state is now actually requiring us to have in place. The good news is that two out of the three for us are already in place. It's just a question that we have them in one policy, not in two. So now we just have to kind of reorganize them. And what we wanted to do is share that first reading, explain why they're doing, why this needs to be done, and then just get feedback. And then we'll bring it back. Like I said, we'll go back with edits as we normally do, and then bring it back to the policy committee for for a final reading to make sure that things are in place the way that we've adjusted them. So with that. Renee and Audra, let me kind of turn it over to you guys, and I'm happy to run the presentation for you if you'd like. You can just tell me to kind of move forward. I'll put up the slides for you. Does that work? Or
Yeah, that would be helpful.
okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Great. And hang on one second. Let me get to the right. There you go.
Okay. Thank you. So, the legislation that was passed this summer, and we had a few legislations that were kind of combined into one. Bob Duff and CC Mara had presented some legislation, and then the Connecticut Library Association, the Connecticut Library Consortium, and the Connecticut Association of School Librarians had also been working on legislation. And so it kind of all got combined into SB 1271, and we worked together to advocate for the passage of that legislation, which did happen. I think it was last spring, summer summer. And so CASEL, which is the Connecticut Association of School Librarians, which Renee and I are both also involved in, worked with the Connecticut Library Association to go through the legislation, to do some workshops, to make sure that the libraries understood what the legislation asks for, and then to take a look at our existing policies and bring them up to speed. So that's what we did with, we talked to Ralph. Renee and I have been working on this with Ralph, and we wanted to make sure that Norwalk, even though our policies we wrote last year were pretty good and we felt really good having those in place last year, we were like, let's make sure that we are also, again, one of the first districts to be up to speed with this. And that's where we're at. So
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder if I can just add in two things with this too. So the legislation that Audra and Renee are discussing tonight affects all libraries. It's not just for school libraries, it's also for public libraries. But in our case, we do have to have policies in place for this. We did also reach out to Shipman and Goodwin, who have helped develop our model policies, and they're going to be working on some in the future, but they're not there yet. So, like I said, their recommendation was to really start, if we're ready, to move forward with doing what we're doing right now and actually start putting policies in place. So with that, I'm sorry, Audra, I'll give it back to
okay,
you.
you can, yep, good.
So what the state legislation asks is that every school library has 3 separate policies. So Norwalk had a lot of this in one policy. They really need it to be broken down into 3 separate policies. So a collection, development, and maintenance policy that will cover how the books are selected and deselected from the collection. A library display and programming policy that talks about how we choose the books to display and the programming that we have coming into the schools. And then the third policy is the library material review and reconsideration policy, which is if somebody who is a member of the district, whether that's someone who is working in the school, whether it's a parent or whether it's a student, they do need to be someone with a vested interest. That's the term that the state uses. And they can be the people who can bring forth a challenge if they disagree with something in a library. And what the policy does as well is it very clearly kind of outlines what process needs to happen and who needs to be a part of that process. And we'll get to that a little bit later when we go over those slides. What they also absolutely ask is that the policies are reviewed every 5 years by the board just to make sure they're still current. That they provide legal immunity to school librarians and to anyone who works in the school library. And of course, the state also says that everything we do is in accordance with the protections against discrimination that's already set forth in the state law.
The legislator vocabulary, which we wanted to make sure was included in our policies, he chose a few examples to share with you here. Library and other educational materials are not curricular items. These are items in the library. School library member is any library worker, certified or non-certified. Individual with vested interest is a school staff member, parents, guardians of a currently enrolled student or a student currently enrolled. And then remove is deliberate removal, not weeding. So we referred to weeding in the policy as deselection. Remove is if there's a challenge to remove an item.
Yeah, and in order, can you just, I guess, I mean, I think maybe you did explain it right, but just in general, well, weeding actually, I know because it's a term that we use, but
Yeah, so weeding or deselection is, and we do have criteria that are specified in the policy. You know, when books are old, damaged, outdated, if information has changed, and we want to make sure that the books are very up to date and accurate. I'll give you an example. We were talking about Pluto today. So, you know, that's the kids and I were talking about when it was a planet, when now it's a dwarf planet. So you have to make sure there are reasons why we would weed our collection and keep it relevant, but that there are criteria that we follow. So that is different than removing a book for a challenge. Also, I'll just go back to individual with a vested interest. This is a difference in our past policies where It used to be that people could challenge books anywhere. They did not have to live in the community, but this protection makes it specific to our community, which the state legislation really, that was a big piece of that.
In the collection and development and maintenance policy, what the state asks is that every policy that's written, what's required is the collection reflects wide and diverse viewpoints. The collection contains materials that are age appropriate and grade level appropriate. So we state that in the policy. And it also states that the collection supports free expression and voluntary inquiry, and that it acknowledges that the school library media specialist is professionally trained to select library materials, and there needs to be a weeding procedure so that it very clearly outlines, just like Audra had said, why we are taking certain books out of the library.
And this is actually brand new. So the display and program policy, because this law does work for it, it's actually an expectation of public libraries and school libraries. This is a policy that is kind of new to our school library, but definitely was something that was a big piece of the public library piece. And so we will both have display and program policies now. And so the requirements for this, for us, it's a completely new policy, but how a library decides what books, authors, etc., to display or promote, supports diverse viewpoints and is age appropriate, supports free expression and voluntary inquiry, acknowledge that the school librarian is professionally trained to just create displays and programs. And I'm just going to jump in on that voluntary inquiry. When we were writing the legislation, I did have a little bit of a part of that. All of the librarians that were involved feel like in our current critical thinking focus that almost all of our districts are doing in the state of Connecticut, voluntary inquiry is such a huge part of our program of graduate, all the work we're doing. That was why it's really included in most of these policies.
And the other policy is the final third one is material review and reconsideration policy. And there's a lot that goes into this one. It's required that there is a process that's established for a challenge. So if somebody does want to challenge a book, it very clearly states what has to happen from that person. It says that the process is unbiased and based on protected characteristics and shall neither favor nor disfavor any group based on protected characteristics. That's vocabulary that the state specifically says they want in there, which is why we put it in quotes. They also ask that we use the term individual with a vested interest when referring to challengers, as defined earlier in the state legislature vocabulary. You saw that an individual with a vested interest is a parent or guardian, a student, or school staff, but it has to be part of that school, that district. Reconsideration form to submit to the principal. So from the principal, it would go to the superintendent. But first, that form is filled out. It needs to have the complainant's full legal name, address, and phone number, and specify why the individual objects to the material. And it needs to be in a written out form. So they have to clearly state all of the reasons why in writing that they do not feel that this book is appropriate for the school. And then the principal takes a copy of that form and sends it out to the superintendent. And also, the book during the challenge process must remain on the shelf and in the catalog while it's being reviewed. The review committee has 60 school days to make a decision and then provide a report to the challenger and to the principal. The decision can be appealed, but it can be appealed to the Board of Ed, but the Board of Ed is only reviewing it to make sure that the policy was followed. It's not to re-review the book. So once a decision is made by the committee that the book is appropriate and will stay in the school, that is good for 3 years, and it will not be reviewed again for those 3 years at any school in the district. So that is why they also just want to make sure that that's very clearly outlined and that the individual who is challenging understands that they cannot bring the book back because they didn't like a decision. They can bring it back if they feel that the process wasn't followed, but once a decision is made, it's the final decision for 3 years.
And the committee, this is the committee suggested by the new legislation, which it was basically we had most of this in place with a few additions. So the superintendent or designee, our policy, I think specifically states someone like Ralph, but we would have that in our policy. The principal of the school, the director of the curriculum, Board of Education representative, a grade level teacher, a parent guardian of a student age of 14 and older, and a parent guardian of a student age of 13 or younger. And those were put into place because if we are reviewing a book, we want to make sure that we have representatives of all ages. And then a certified school librarian, their legislation says if your district doesn't have one, it must use from another district. You'll see in our policy, we made it a little more specific for Norwalk.
And then we just list some resources. If anyone wanted to read the state statute, you can see that there's a link to there. There's a policy checklist, which Audra and I had gone through after, reviewing the policies to make sure that everything that's required is in there. And there is a freedom to read toolkit that has been put out by CASEL, the Connecticut Association of School Librarians. And then there's a link to the draft of the revised policy that's specifically for our district.
Great. Well, thank you guys. Before we go on to actually take a look at the policies and some of the changes, I'd like to open it up to the board to just, if you have any immediate questions before we actually dig into the policy itself.
I don't have questions, but just thinking about the importance of these topics and the fact that, the importance of librarians in the library and the libraries at school. There's a lot of work, a lot of discussion, a lot of material to constantly be reviewing. But I'm also very glad that these policies are coming down the pike, and we want to be able to have books for everyone, to be, inclusive.
Yeah. I mean, if I could say something real quick, I know that, in a testament to, from the day that Dr. Stray came into the district, we only had at that time, I believe it was 2, potentially 3 certified library media specialists. And she even saw that, how important it was for them as being the hub of many of these schools, that we needed to have certified library media specialists in all of our buildings. And so we've built it out to the point where we do have very, rock solid staff now. And you can see from our LMSs that a couple of them that are joining us tonight, how involved they are with this process. They're also one of the key elements for us moving forward with things like AI in our portrait of a graduate. All of that goes back to really that hub of them helping to be able to develop those resources and give the skill sets that are needed for our teachers and our students to be able to be successful. So yeah, kudos to you guys. I mean, it's like this has been a lot of work that you've done over the last couple of years.
I would like to comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sort of piggybacking on what you just said, Ralph, that we're in an unusual situation where those that just presented not only are informing us of what the state is asking for, but they, in fact, were instrumental in the state coming to this particular policy. And I just want to state publicly that that level of educational leadership from our media specialists, librarians, certified librarians, is just something to commend. I really appreciate the work you do and working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And with that, I will move over to, as soon as I can move my screen, to our policy. So if you guys want to kind of guide me and just tell me to move down, I will follow your lead.
I'll jump in. If it's red, it's probably new. So we kind of tried to keep some of the wording from our old policy. Some of the new red writing might have include things we had in the old policy, but we just streamlined a little bit. Anything that's in black font is probably straight from our existing policy. So we retitled. So it was 6013 was the entire policy. Right now they say 6013A. B, and C, but that might have to be changed. I think we're going to have three completely separate policies. But right now we wrote 6013A for collection, development, and maintenance policy, and that used to have just a slightly different title. So we clarified those titles. So the black font, like I said, most of this comes from our existing policy about where our collection development comes from and talking about our role and that we're professionally trained to curate and develop our collections. Some of the expectations talks a little bit about that collection development. So not a lot of changes there on this first page.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the display and program policy is completely all new. So that's why it's all in red because we didn't have one. Many school libraries and even public libraries didn't have one until recently. So we were able to borrow an example from Castle. They had a sample policy. That's what we're using. It recognizes that the library displays should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all students, represents a wide range of varied and diverging viewpoints as a whole, requires students access to age-appropriate and grade-level appropriate content, provide content that is relevant to research, independent interests, and educational needs of students, and promotes voluntary inquiry, free expression, and the access to ideas. Oh,
Yep. I'm sorry.
I think we were still in collection development.
sorry.
No, that's okay. So here's what Renee was just reading from you. So like we said, the collection development didn't have a lot of changes. It was like wording, but here is the program and policy she was just clearly reviewing for us.
I also just want to make it, for the public to know that yes, you guys are scrolling through this quickly. However, we did get the form, so we've been able to see this prior. And if they want to be able to read this and take their time, they can look it up on the website.
Yeah, and the PowerPoint at the beginning, the presentation is a summary of the changes
Yes.
of that we were doing on each one of those. So you can kind of see that. But to make it easier for the public to understand too, having it highlighted in red are the new items that were not already included in our policy. And of course, as Renee just mentioned, this is a brand new for any school system. I don't know of any school systems that had a display policy in the past. So, but it is common, I guess, amongst public libraries to be able to have such a policy.
Also, it did come into play in a need for certain districts that were having challenges, not just to specific books, but we were seeing challenges to author visits. And so it was like a new problem. And now let's make sure we're ready to handle what we need to handle. So that policy.
Audra, can you
Yeah.
explain what challenges you had regarding?
It was not here in Norwalk. Another city in Connecticut did have a challenge to an author that was brought in to a school. So that this policy will handle author visits, displays, programming. And so I think it was just an awareness that that's a need to make sure that school districts also have programming and display policies.
And the display policy really helps also to make sure that everyone and the policies are inclusive and everyone can see themselves in a book, especially when we have heritage months and we can put those books out for display. Sometimes when things are brought out, that's when people decide that they would, they oppose whatever that book is about. So that's why it's really important to have a display policy to say that it supports the diversity that we've already agreed to as a district and also as a state.
Are there questions on the first two policies, or should we go ahead to the third? Okay. So the library material review and reconsideration policy. This is an important policy, and it does protect the libraries, but it also does provide the opportunity if there's a concern for people to um, go through the challenge process. And so we again went through our existing policy. Like we said, the first and third policies were kind of all together in one. So we kept certain language again that was already in our existing policy that we created last year. And I just want to say, like last year, we were very thankful to the committee and to Ralph for taking the lead on that because as someone who's been in the district through the evolution of our library program, we did not have secure policies in place until last year. So this is all very important for our department. So we added this protection of for the civil or criminal liability. Connecticut is really just being protective by putting it in there. We are not a state that has seen this happen, but we have seen other states and other librarians nationwide being held accountable criminally. And so that was important to include in our policies just
And
for that.
not just the librarians, but anybody who works in the library. So if there's a library that also has a para working in it, that para is protected as well.
So we made sure that that was added in. Some of the red words you would see, we just changed some of our wording. So selection and maintenance to match the title of the policy. Ralph, you can scroll down. Again, just certain wording. And then the definitions. So the definitions that I mentioned in the slideshow, we made sure that was included in a few of the policies to be very clear so that people would understand what those definitions were referring to.
Yeah, and you may see that repeated in all three policies with the definitions, just so we can actually make sure that everybody does have clarity.
This line is because I don't know how to like specify. So the first part was kind of in another policy, and then I was like, this is kind of where this policy really begins. So and again, it was not really taking the old policy out. We just reworded a little bit of this, but we understand on occasion a complainant, which is for our language in our policy, complainant was the term we were using. The new definition was a person with a vested interest. So you will see both of those are still in here, but they may wish to lodge a complaint against library and other educational materials as defined in this policy. So then this is going to outline that. And so you'll see a mix of the old and new. We explain what those materials are. And then again, we took some things from our past research. We changed it, material review and reconsideration. Okay, so a couple of things that we added and we talked to you guys already about the fact that until a decision is made, the materials must remain in the media center. So that is there. A school district may consolidate any requests for review. I think that was actually from our existing policy.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
so that's red, but we might just reword it. Review
But
committee.
it's also in the checklist. So the state is requiring that as well. So
the review committee, it's pretty much taken from both our old policy and what the state is specifying. But we can always add specific to our district. So you might see I put in Norwalk Public Schools in a few places. And then if you scroll down to where it mentions the library media specialist, we decided to put some of the guidelines we would like to see in Norwalk, a certified school library media specialist employed by the board in the following preference order. First, ideally, the LMS employed at the school with the specific work in question. Then, if that's not available, an LMS employed by another NPS district school, so someone still in our department. And then if there is not a certified LMS in the district, they can use someone employed by another Board of Education in the state, which is what the state required. So for us, with a robust department like we do have right now, which is great, hopefully we would have representation from within the district. And then is this a repetitive, the student, Renee? Because do we have students listed already? We'll
I
have to
don't
take
think
a look at
so.
No, no, I think, yeah.
Okay, and then they'll read the challenge material in its entirety and evaluate it against our collection, development, and maintenance policy. So the purpose of the committee is to review our other policy and say, yes, the choosing of this book was selected in accordance with that policy. And then this is all just the details of how they should submit the form once a decision has been made. This is the one in bold is also part of the requirement to have it posted on the district website. So once a decision's been made, then the policy committee, the board, the review committee would post it. And then it can't be challenged again for 3 years. And honestly, that I feel like these challenges in a lot of districts have cost a lot of money and time that I think that is put in here to really protect the district. Once you go through a process like this, it's a resource heavy process. So here's the request for reconsideration. We just streamlined it a little bit, right, Renee?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually cleaned up the form a little bit that we had in the past.
And then if you keep scrolling, we would like to know which school owned the challenge material. What are we asking reconsideration of? So there are different types of media. You can scroll. And then we did ask, have you read the book in its entirety? So we added that as a requirement. And then displays and programs were added. And that's really it. It's a very basic form, but to set the process in motion.
Yeah, so thank you, Renee and Audra. I think, kudos to you guys to really take this and break it down into 3 policies in comparison to one, and actually developing the display policy as well, and updating our form too. So, once again, this is actually something we somewhat have in place right now, but it is something that in our new guidelines from the latest state legislator, we do not need to now have that, at least that display policy. But these are truly, in our opinion, much stronger policies the way that they're set up than what we currently have and stuff. So it's just kind of an upgrade and a version 2.0.
Yeah, the other thing is too, we're looking at it and it's been what, 30 minutes? And it looks like real quick, but all the work and the hard lifting that you have done for days, months, as long as it's not an easy job to look at all of this and make sure you bring in everything that the state wants and making sure that no one's left out.
Thank you.
I have a question on comparing what you've done with what, for example, our the head of the library system in Norwalk. Would they have do they also have to have 3 sections? And could they cut and paste a lot of what you have done to
So
theirs?
I am actually the president of the library board of trustees in my town, which is
Oh,
Easton.
okay,
So,
so perfect person.
so I did just do this before doing it for the school, and we did revise the policies, and we had to include certain verbiage that the state recommended or required. We did create the display and programming policy because there wasn't one at our library. And what we found too was for the state takes it a little bit further for the public library. We not only have to send it to the state library to make sure that they approve of what is in the different policies, but then we bring it to our board for the library and they have to sign it off. And then we have to send it back to the state library to show that we went through the process and that everyone has agreed to the policies in order for the library to get any funding from the state library. So if a public library needs to get some kind of funding, they absolutely must have these policies in place. If they do not have the policies, they cannot get the funding. So they have a good reason to want to make sure that they have it all done and approved. And theirs has to be into the state library, I think, by the end of November.
Well,
And just, quick summary, could you point any differences between what a child or a parent might experience going to the public library compared to going to a school library?
I think the biggest difference with these policies is that in our policy, we clearly state that if a parent feels that their child shouldn't have access to certain materials, that parent can make that decision for their child. They just can't make it for somebody else's child.
Understood.
The understanding in a public library is you are going to the library with your child. So you can tell your child, no, don't take that, but you can't tell a librarian to remove it because it might be offensive to somebody else. So in one case, in the public library, the parent and child are there together. In the school library, because the parent isn't here, we are fulfilling what the parent wants on behalf of their child, but only their child.
Okay, that's a clear. That's a good example of what would have to be different.
Right. And we actually, so we have a one of our district-wide PD days for our librarians is going to be on November 5th. I'm sure we'll take a couple of minutes to kind of review what's going on here. So if there's any other questions you have, or comments, please get them to me, and I'll make sure that we have it on November 5th so they can actually give some more input because Audra and Renee have been working with our LMSs in this process. They took time at our first PD day too, as well, to have some quick discussions and stuff around this. But I do think, though, that we can also ask, we can ask, or we will definitely touch base if she's available on that day, Sherelle, if she wanted to come by as well. So we can make sure that we kind of actually have everybody in the same loop. And she's aware that now that we've had the meeting with the policy committee and stuff. And if they have any additional feedback that they'd like to add in too, that could help, that could assist.
It's a good idea.
I think it was all very streamlined and clear. So great job on putting everything together. It seems like that there's a good clarity that was needed and for us going forward in the future, and it'll be helpful for you guys. So I'm glad to see that for a policy coming through.
Thanks. So then our next steps will be we will make sure we kind of clean these up into 3 separate policies into the documents. And then when we come back, Chairman Carpio, the goal would be to bring these policies in place, but then similar to what we had to do with the climate one this summer, that we're going to have to remove. We're going to have a vote to remove the other policy as well too. So,
correct.
yes.
Well, this was great information. And again, thank you for the hard lift, everyone. It's very important that we keep these books out and that children have access to read. With that, I would like a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. And good night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.